Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named The Midwich Cuckoos. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins in the sleepy town of Midwich in northwest England, where residents lived a carefree life until one day, a series of strange events began to unfold. First, household appliances became erratic, light bulbs flickered, and radios filled with static. Then, the power cut out completely. Many residents sensed something was wrong, and the police station's phone lines were overwhelmed with calls. Engineers analyzed the data and concluded that the power anomaly was concentrated in the streets surrounding the school, likely caused by an electromagnetic pulse. Yet the town's substation showed no signs of failure, making the incident feel utterly inexplicable. As evening approached, while repair crews were still investigating the cause of the blackout, horses in their stables grew agitated. They violently kicked down their wooden doors and bolted into the streets, acting like crazy Ferraris as if fleeing something terrifying. The town's young people, however, remained largely unaware of the impending danger. Only a few noticed a strange light appearing on the horizon. Then, just as suddenly, the power returned, but residents found they couldn't turn their lights off. A young boy looked up at the sky in terror as the clusters of light converged into a bolt of yellow lightning, striking the school's playing field with incredible speed. What happened next was even more bizarre. All residents in the vicinity of the school collapsed, falling unconscious without any warning. Even the Ferrari horses didn't escape, lying motionless on the ground as if they had lost consciousness. It was as if someone had pressed a pause button on the entire town, which fell into a deathly silence. Susanna, a psychotherapist from Midwich, was in London on a date with a hormone-strong man she'd met online. Having raised her daughter alone for over a decade, Susanna knew the hardships of being a single mother. That day, she had left her daughter, who suffers from panic attacks, at home and traveled to London, coincidentally avoiding the strange catastrophe. It was only after her meeting that she realized her calls home were going unanswered. All trains back to Midwich had been suspended due to the power issues, so Susanna had to take a taxi. However, as she neared the town, she found the only road in was blocked by the police. An official lockdown had been ordered, prohibiting anyone from entering or leaving. Completely bewildered, Susanna got out of the car and took a back path to bypass the blockade. Her daughter's phone still wasn't being answered, and her anxiety grew. Suddenly, she saw several people in hazmat suits approaching a collapsed resident. The lead man was tied to a rope, moving cautiously as if facing something terrifying. But as he got close, the rescuer also collapsed. He was quickly pulled back to safety by his companions using the rope. Witnessing this, Susanna was horrified. Just as the crew spotted her, she turned and ran frantically toward her home, but the next moment, Susanna also collapsed without warning. These strange incidents quickly drew the attention of high-level authorities. The town's chief inspector, Paul, was soon joined by a female government agent with military investigators on their way. They had established a perimeter around the affected area. With no communication possible and anyone approaching the zone inexplicably passing out, Paul was still in the dark about the situation, not even knowing if the residents were dead or alive. He had previously sent in a small drone, but it experienced severe magnetic interference as soon as it entered the zone, failing to transmit any images. Susanna, who had collapsed on the edge of the zone, was soon discovered by the staff. Her case was mild, and she regained consciousness shortly after. Paul hurried over to gather information. Susanna recalled a feeling of weightlessness and a dizzy spell before she lost consciousness, remembering nothing else after that. Paul wanted to arrange a full medical examination, but Susanna refused, desperate to know what had happened to her daughter, a question no one there could answer. Paul stood grimly by the cordon. His pregnant wife was also trapped and unreachable inside the blackout zone. The last message she had sent him was strange, stating that the lights were on again and that they wouldn't turn off. Like Susanna, all the victims' family members were gathered in a sports hall waiting for news. After a long night, the military finally arrived. Paul went straight to the command center, where experts from various fields had assembled and a special task force had been formed. Paul found the situation deeply unsettling and suggested evacuating the unaffected parts of the town. However, the head of the task force advised him to wait, as the military was preparing to send a helicopter to investigate. As Paul looked up at the sky, a sense of foreboding washed over him. All the experts waited anxiously for the pilot's report. But as the helicopter reached the airspace above the affected zone, the crew members collapsed one by one, and alarms blared from the console as the instruments failed. The helicopter plummeted to the ground like a metal shell. Now everyone understood the gravity of the situation. Paul grew increasingly worried about his wife, who was several months pregnant. An announcement came over the radio, instructing all personnel to proceed with the evacuation of the remaining areas. Even the families waiting in the sports hall were told to leave. Many people protested, refusing to leave without knowing the fate of their loved ones. A soldier raised his weapon, clearly intending to enforce the order. Just as tensions peaked, Susanna's phone rang. It was her daughter calling from inside the zone. Inexplicably, all the residents who had fainted had woken up at the exact same moment. Other families also began receiving calls from their relative. The town, once frozen in time, came back to life. The awakened residents looked around in confusion, perhaps not yet realizing what had happened. Paul breathed a long sigh of relief. With the mysterious phenomenon over, it was time to send in the rescue teams. Since he had to remain at the command post, he entrusted the task of rescuing his pregnant wife to the government agent. People began to appear on the town's streets. It seemed the disaster had not caused mass casualties. The agent went straight to Paul's house. Upon opening the door, she was hit by the strong smell of gas. Holding her breath, she rescued a woman from the living room, but it wasn't Paul's wife. The agent rushed back inside and found a pregnant woman lying in the kitchen, but she was no longer breathing. When Paul heard the devastating news of his wife's death, he abandoned his post and rushed home, but there was nothing he could do. The woman who had been rescued was his wife's sister, who now stood by the window in silent mourning. Susanna returned to town in a police car and was finally reunited with her daughter. But strangely, the girl raised her hand and gently placed it on her own stomach. At almost the exact same moment, other young women who had awakened, both married and single, seemed to feel that something was now inside them. 2 months later, the town had finally moved past the blackout incident and returned to a semblance of normalcy. The hospital's obstetrics and gynecology department, however, had become unusually busy. In the aftermath of the strange event, the number of pregnancies in town had surged. Sam and his wife had recently moved to Midwich, eager to start a family. They had been trying to conceive for months. After the blackout, his wife was thrilled to discover she was pregnant. For 2 months, the couple diligently attended all their medical checkups. One day, they were invited to a hospital seminar where the room was already filled with pregnant women of all ages and their families. Once everyone had arrived, the medical expert on stage delivered a shocking truth. Every woman in the room had conceived on the night of the blackout. Although some had suspected it, the room erupted in disbelief, especially when the expert admitted they still had no idea how the pregnancies had occurred. There was, however, one piece of good news. All the fetuses appeared to be developing normally. Paul also reassured the crowd that the special task force would continue its investigation. But Sam and his wife couldn't accept it. They had believed their pregnancy was the result of their own hormone efforts, not some inexplicable event. For all they knew, it could be part of some secret experiment. Paul reiterated that what had happened that night was a phenomenon they couldn't explain, and they couldn't rule out the involvement of another power. The government had classified the incident as a red-level event, meaning everyone present had to sign a non-disclosure agreement and was forbidden from revealing any information about the pregnancies. This only agitated the crowd further. Sam's wife declared she would get a lawyer, but everyone soon discovered their phones had no signal. Just then, several armed soldiers entered the room. Paul patiently explained that the matter had escalated to the level of national security and that they had no right to refuse. Susanna was there with her pregnant daughter. Since her daughter was single, she agreed that the pregnancy was highly unusual and that the officials' cautious approach was justified. A few others then spoke up in support, and eventually the crowd was persuaded to sign the agreements. One clause stipulated unconditional cooperation with all tests and examinations, as the government was also desperate to find out who the fathers were. However, not all the women accepted their pregnancies, particularly the single ones who weren't ready to be mothers. 3 of them decided to have abortions. But as they were signing the consent forms at the hospital, the lights above flickered. The women's eyes glazed over, and without signing the papers, they stood up in unison and walked out of the room like puppets on a string. It seemed some mysterious force was secretly protecting these unborn children. The town had become a very strange place. Young women had become pregnant after a single fainting spell. The military's investigation team, though suspicious, had limited options. Besides enforcing secrecy to prevent panic, they extracted free-floating fetal DNA from the mothers for testing. The results were astounding. The babies had inherited some of their mother's genes, but the other half of their DNA was of unknown origin. Sam and his wife had been confident, as they had been trying to conceive right before the blackout. But the test results showed that the child had no genetic connection to Sam. His wife immediately wanted an abortion, but a calmer Sam persuaded her not to. He reminded her that it was uncertain if the procedure would even be allowed to happen, and besides, having a child was their long-held dream. The official task force was powerless. All they could do was increase surveillance on the pregnant women. Susanna had made a strong impression at the meeting. Paul approached her, asking her to join the investigation team. Since many of the pregnant women were already seeking her for counseling, she was in a unique position to monitor their psychological state. Thinking of her own daughter, who was also a victim, Susanna agreed without hesitation. Time passed in a calm yet eerie atmosphere. For 5 months, the town's pregnant women attended regular checkups. The fetuses were all developing normally, though they were much larger than average. More bizarrely, one woman, feeling the pervasive strangeness of the town, tried to leave by train. But each time she was about to board, her legs would refuse to move. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't take a single step forward. As time went on, most of the women, both married and single, gradually accepted their pregnancies. Some even began to look forward to the arrival of their new babies. But no one could have predicted that the day would come so soon. Almost simultaneously, all the pregnant women began to experience labor pains. The hospital's delivery ward faced its busiest moment ever. Thanks to the efforts of the medical staff and the mothers, over 20 babies were born on the same day. It was, without a doubt, the greatest miracle in the town's history. Even more strangely, all the babies had pupils that glowed with a golden light. The investigation team tightened its control, completely isolating the area. The residents inside could not leave, and their every move was under strict surveillance. What they had experienced was simply beyond explanation. In just over 2 years, the children grew to the size of 6-year-olds and were mentally far superior to their peers. They often gazed up at the sky, as if waiting for something to arrive. While most parents showed no signs of distress and treated them as normal children, the investigation team remained highly cautious. They set up a special classroom for the children to facilitate unified education and observation. Someone noticed old photographs on a desk, revealing that this classroom had been used before. The children all stared at the photos, their thoughts unreadable. The parents, however, were pleased with the high-quality facilities. As they were organizing the new books they had received, the lights overhead began to flicker. The children, as if by a silent agreement, looked out the large windows and then walked out of the classroom together. The bewildered parents followed them outside and saw a strange girl walking slowly across the playground. The children seemed to know her already and had even prepared a school uniform for her. A small dog barked ferociously at the girl, but after receiving a warning glance from the group, it tucked its tail and fled. The parents stood by, completely confused, wondering where this child came from. To find the answer, Susanna and Paul followed the little girl to the home of a local councilman. They learned that the girl's mother, Lena, had been the councilman's assistant. She wasn't a resident of Midwich, but she happened to be having an affair with him when the blackout occurred. After waking up, she had rushed back to London. It wasn't until she discovered she was pregnant that she, assuming the councilman was the father, decided to return. Moreover, her daughter had insisted on coming back to this town. So, she brought the child on a journey to find her father. The councilman's wife stood by, weeping, while Paul and the others cursed their oversight. They had missed a mother from outside the town. Now that she had delivered herself and the child to them, they had to make sure they both stayed. Lena, however, had no intention of settling down. She only wanted her daughter to meet her father. But the girl herself announced that she wanted to stay in Midwich, and then rattled off the names of all the other children. Everyone present was stunned. This was the first time she had ever met them. Susanna decided to conduct a group test on the children. She asked one of them to select a picture, and all the other children chose the exact same one. The observers gasped. Susanna, from a professional standpoint, explained that it was like a hive mind. The children could communicate their thoughts and even share knowledge and experiences without speaking. Meanwhile, the mothers waiting in the lobby were unaware of the test. Sam's wife, Zoe, felt something was wrong. She had tried to escape Midwich during her pregnancy and had felt the strange force firsthand. She stepped outside for some air and saw the government agent speaking with the newcomer, Lena. After the agent left, she quietly went into the reception area. Zoe was curious about this woman, the first outsider she had seen since the blackout. To Zoe, this place was a prison. They couldn't leave or even contact the outside world. She warned Lena that if she ever got the chance, she had to get out of town. Lena grew more terrified as she listened and recalled some strange incidents herself. She told Zoe that her daughter seemed to have a natural ability to control people. Before Zoe could process this, Lena added that a strange man had once come looking for her daughter, talked with her for an hour, and then left, implying that someone already knew of the girl's existence. Zoe didn't have time to think it over. After exchanging phone numbers with Lena, she hurried away. But just as she left the room, she overheard a conversation between Susanna, Paul, and the others. Though shocked by what she heard, she kept it to herself. When the children came home from school, Zoe and her daughter Hannah saw their neighbor pulling something from the water. As they got closer, they saw it was the body of the little dog that had barked at the children. Seeing the smug look on her daughter's face, Zoe felt a chill run down her spine all the way to her smelly butt. At the same time, Susanna's granddaughter was drawing something. When her mother turned away, she didn't notice that the drawing was of the dead dog. Back at home, Zoe told her husband Sam everything she had heard that morning. She was now convinced that the children were all monsters and began to regret giving birth to Hannah. Her husband, however, thought she was being overly anxious. Hannah seemed to sense her mother's suspicion and told Sam that her mother didn't love her anymore. The situation in Sam's family was the reverse of most. Typically, it was the husband who felt alienated from the strange child and favored their biological children, while the wife defended them. If not for his wife's strong objections and the annual $30,000 subsidy, he would have sent the monster away long ago. Just then, Hannah was explaining to her mother that they hadn't harmed the dog. Zoe froze, suddenly feeling her hand move uncontrollably toward a pot of boiling oatmeal. She suspected Hannah was using her powers to control her. At the last second, she regained control of her hand. Hannah repeated that she hadn't hurt the dog. When Sam ran in to see what the commotion was, Hannah innocently asked what was wrong with her mommy. Zoe had to restrain herself from screaming. Elsewhere, the newcomer Lena had reached an agreement with the investigation team to stay in town temporarily to observe her daughter. Susanna took them to the town's most luxurious hotel, only to find the councilman's wife waiting in the lobby. She felt it was necessary to have a talk with her husband's lover. Susanna took the opportunity to lead Lena's daughter aside, but the girl just stared motionless at her mother. A few moments later, the conversation ended badly. Lena stormed off in anger, but her daughter unexpectedly walked over to the councilman's wife and gave her a hug. It was a gesture that both stated her position and asked for forgiveness. The maturity she displayed far surpassed that of her mother. As night fell and all the children slept, the town was simmering with tension. Zoe went to see Susanna and told her about Hannah's strange behavior, how she had used her powers to hurt her and then played innocent in front of her father. In her own home, the sleeping Hannah's eyes snapped open, as if she could hear her mother's accusations. Susanna was skeptical. Although the children were strange, there had never been a single case of them harming their parents in 2 years. Zoe's emotions spiraled, feeling she had come to the wrong person for help. She stormed out and slammed the door. Meanwhile, Lena had not forgotten Zoe's warning. Late at night, she quietly woke her daughter, planning to flee the town with her. But the next moment, the town's electricity began to flicker erratically. All the children sat up in their beds, staring blankly ahead. In the hotel garage, the girl suddenly pulled away from her mother, saying she didn't want to leave. Lena, growing frantic, spoke more harshly. She then saw her daughter's eyes glow gold, and the alarms of the surrounding cars began to blare. When the town fell silent again, the girl had returned to the councilman's house alone. She told them that her mother had dropped her off and driven away. Just as Susanna was about to call Lena, her phone rang. It was Paul. He had found Lena's body in the hotel's underground car park, already cold. The town was a giant prison, and the wardens were the residents' own beloved children. A woman had tried to escape with her daughter, only to disappear that same night. The open car door suggested a grim fate. Even stranger, all the security footage from the time of the incident was corrupted, as if some mysterious force had deliberately erased any trace of Lena's existence. Paul didn't give up. After repeatedly reviewing the footage from before and after the incident, he finally spotted a suspicious vehicle in the reflection of a distant mirror. Its path coincided perfectly with Lena's location at the time of her disappearance. Using the license plate, Paul quickly identified it as the hotel's refrigerated delivery truck. After a long search, he and his assistant arrived at the frozen goods company. The manager told them the truck's lock was broken and it was about to be sent for repairs. A sense of dread washed over Paul. He pried open the lock. Amidst the swirling cold mist, he found Lena's frozen body. The head of the investigation team, Westcott, speculated that she might have been accidentally locked inside and frozen to death due to a short circuit. But Paul was convinced it was no accident. Lena would never have abandoned her daughter to hide in a freezer truck. If this news got out, most residents would not be able to accept it. Westcott solemnly promised that the joint investigation would provide a reasonable explanation, but until then, the matter of Lena's death had to remain confidential. He didn't want this accident to plunge the town into panic. Things went just as Westcott had hoped. The mothers, far from realizing their children were dangerous, even started a weekly support group to share stories about how adorable their children were. Susanna felt uneasy, thinking the mothers were becoming overly attached. These children were, after all, a product of the blackout 2 years ago, and the task force was no closer to finding the cause. Susanna noticed that Zoe never attended these meetings, sensing that she was perhaps the only mother who remained wary of her child. Susanna quietly approached her granddaughter. The girl had been having nightmares every night, crying out about how cold it was. As Susanna reached out to touch her, she felt an icy chill, as if she were in a frozen landscape. This filled her with a profound sense of unease. In truth, Susanna was one of the few clear-headed residents left. She had always viewed the children with a critical eye. Walking over to a desk, she looked through her granddaughter's drawings. Besides the dog that had mysteriously died, there was a drawing of the missing Lena. The next morning, Susanna visited Zoe, hoping to discuss the children. But Zoe looked extremely uncomfortable. With her daughter right there, she couldn't exactly call her a monster to her face. Just then, their mad neighbor drove up, his older son in the back seat covered in blood. Susanna went over to ask what had happened, only to be met with the neighbor's furious roar that it was the fault of those freaks. It turned out the neighbor had always been prejudiced against the children, privately calling them demon spawn. He doted on his biological son. That day, seeing his demon-spawned son on the swing, he had violently pulled him off to make way for his older boy. The demon-spawned son, George, exchanged a look with his friend Nathan, and suddenly the swing began to fly uncontrollably. The mad neighbor was certain George was responsible. Sam, who was also there, hadn't seen the details, but he knew another child, Nathan, had been present. During the lunch break, Susanna went to the school alone to speak with Nathan. Although Sam was reluctant, he eventually gave in to her persistence and woke the sleeping boy. In a private classroom, Susanna took out a tape recorder and began asking about the swing incident. When Nathan remained silent, she changed the subject, asking if they had harmed Lena. Nathan replied that he couldn't answer because the other children were listening. Susanna pressed on, asking if they were angry because Lena had tried to take her daughter away and what their nightmares were about. Nathan began to tremble, and the other children in the next room all sat up, chanting in unison that they should get them out. The strange atmosphere alerted Sam. The children, in perfect sync, blamed everything on Susanna. The incident quickly reached Paul. He believed Susanna's actions had terrified the children. Despite her insistence that the children possessed the power to harm adults and might be connected to Lena's disappearance, Paul was furious. As one of Nathan's guardians, he forbade Susanna from investigating further, both personally and professionally. The government agent went even further, warning that if it happened again, they would arrest her. Meanwhile, Zoe listened to the voicemail Lena had left her on the night she disappeared, where she had explicitly stated her plan to leave town with her daughter. Yet the official story was that Lena had abandoned her child and returned to London. Zoe suspected she had been murdered. Just then, her daughter Hannah came into the room saying she wanted to sleep there that night because she was having a nightmare. Zoe was stunned since Hannah had previously told Susanna that she never had dreams. After forcibly putting her daughter back in her own bed, Zoe suddenly felt her body lose control, followed by a sharp pain in her forehead. The sensation was all too familiar. She knew it was Hannah's doing, but Sam insisted she had just been clumsy. Zoe was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She deeply regretted giving birth to Hannah, especially now that her husband trusted the child more than he trusted her. The next day, Sam took Hannah to school as usual. As they passed their mad neighbor's house, he politely asked if George would be at school. Learning he was being punished, Hannah deliberately brushed against the mad neighbor's car. The neighbor, who already detested the demon children, immediately started yelling at her. At that moment, Zoe hurried out of the house. Hiding a camera, she secretly bought a train ticket. She was going to escape Midwich. She had tried once before while pregnant, but was stopped by a mysterious force. This time, however, nothing happened. Zoe successfully boarded a train to London. It wasn't until she stepped out of the station that the shock hit her. She had actually left. Zoe called her ex-boyfriend, the only person she could turn to. She had cut off all contact after moving to Midwich, and they hadn't seen each other in nearly 3 years. After some hesitation, she finally told him everything that had happened. She described living in the town like a prisoner, unable to leave or confide in anyone, forced to deal with the strange children every day. She never wanted to go back. Her ex-boyfriend immediately said he wanted her to stay in London with him. As Zoe was about to agree, she had a sudden realization. Why couldn't she leave 2 years ago, but could now? She wondered if the children, sensing her hostility, had deliberately let her leave because Sam was the parent they wanted to attach themselves to. Zoe instantly understood everything. She warned her ex-boyfriend not to tell anyone about their conversation and rushed back towards Midwich, not noticing that the head of the task force, Westcott, was watching her from a distance. Back in Midwich, Sam couldn't get in touch with his wife and was growing anxious. Hannah approached him, looking troubled, and asked if he was just going to let the mad neighbor yell at her for nothing. Hearing this, Sam reacted like a lion whose pride had been challenged. He stormed over to the neighbor's house, demanding an apology for his daughter. The two men quickly came to blows. At first, Sam was getting badly beaten, but then he noticed that the mad neighbor's punches were failing to land. He was being controlled by Hannah's powers. Sam seized the opportunity and beat the neighbor unconscious. A moment later, however, he realized he had gone too far. Meanwhile, Susanna, despite the stern warnings, had not given up on uncovering the truth about the children. An opportunity finally arose when her daughter had to go out with friends, leaving her granddaughter Evie in her care. She had planned to ask about the nightmares, but the girl said she wanted to go for a walk. They wandered into a forest. As Susanna, preoccupied with her thoughts, was about to bring up the topic, Evie suggested a game of hide and seek. When Susanna finished counting, her granddaughter was gone. At the same time, the boy Nathan found his foster father, Paul, and told him that Evie was scared because she thought her grandmother, Susanna, wanted to hurt her. Paul was skeptical at first, but then he contacted Susanna's daughter. Realizing Susanna was alone with her granddaughter, they both knew something was terribly wrong. Susanna followed the sound of Evie's voice and found herself by the train tracks. The girl's tone was chilling as she accused Susanna of wanting them all to die. Then she started running down the tracks. Just then a train approached. Susanna ran desperately after her but couldn't catch up. Fortunately, Paul arrived just in time. They grabbed Evie, who cried out that her grandma was trying to hurt her. As the train roared past, Susanna was left speechless, unable to defend herself. That night, the mother moved out of Susanna's house with her daughter. A professional psychotherapist had been completely outmaneuvered by a child. Meanwhile, Zoe finally made it back from London. Her husband, Sam, had pieced everything together. He now understood that he had been manipulated by their daughter, Hannah. Zoe was overjoyed. She had been worrying about how to convince her husband, and now he had seen the children's evil for himself. All they had to do now was figure out how to escape the town. The couple planned to abandon everything and flee, but they faced obstacles not only from the authorities, but also from the town's cold, strange children. None of this, however, could shake Zoe's determination. She compiled a list of all the strange events that had occurred in Midwich over the years, as well as the government's crimes of restricting the residents' freedom. Hannah seemed to sense something. Zoe quickly closed her laptop, pretending nothing was wrong. While their daughter was at school, the couple finished writing their exposé, but they didn't post it online immediately. Zoe first printed a copy and hid it on top of a wardrobe, then gave another copy to the agent. Just as the agent was about to report this to her superior, Westcott, he surprised everyone with news. Lena's autopsy report was complete. Her blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit. The official investigation concluded that Lena had been drunk, wandered into the freezer truck, and accidentally locked herself inside. Paul stood by silently, knowing the report was a fabrication. Lena's death was no accident. The agent, with a wry smile, presented Zoe's document to Westcott, curious to see how he would handle it. That afternoon, Zoe received a reply. The investigation team wanted to meet with her in person. They met in a secluded cabin. Zoe used the threat of exposing the town's secrets to demand that the task force not interfere with their departure and that they help look after Hannah. After learning there was another copy of the exposé hidden elsewhere, Westcott finally agreed to Zoe's terms. With this, Zoe's escape plan was mostly successful. All that was left was to deceive the children. Just then, she felt a strange sensation in her stomach. Rushing home to take a test, Zoe was overjoyed to discover she was pregnant with her second child. She was both nervous and excited. She had to keep this a secret from Hannah. That afternoon, while Sam was taking the children on an outing, they passed a tree bearing fruit. He quickly warned them that the fruit was poisonous and to stay away. But the children just stood by the tree, seemingly lost in thought. When Sam got home, Zoe eagerly laid out their escape plan. The next day, the children would be at a picnic. Sam would make an excuse to leave while she packed their bags at home and sent him a text. The key was not to let the children find out. Meanwhile, Susanna had been cut off by her daughter ever since the train track incident. The children were masters of manipulation, easily turning mothers against their own families. As Susanna was worrying, she received an anonymous email encouraging her not to give up. At the end was the name of a town, Nordosko. Paul had also realized something was wrong. He lived with his late wife's sister and treated his nephew Nathan like his own son. One day, however, he heard his sister-in-law cry out. Rushing in, he found Nathan had torn out her nose ring. When Paul angrily confronted him, Nathan said his mother never wore a nose ring. He was about to use his powers on Paul when the sister-in-law intervened, diffusing the situation. But Paul had seen it all. He immediately went to Susanna, admitting her concerns were valid. The children did have the power to harm people and were excellent at deception. Paul now trusted Susanna completely and told her about Lena's death. They both immediately suspected the children. Susanna played the recording of her conversation with Nathan, but the part about Lena's death was drowned out by the children shouting. Then she remembered the anonymous email. Strangely, she couldn't find any information online about a town called Nordosko. Paul couldn't offer any answers either, but took the tape back to his office, hoping a colleague could remove the background noise and reveal what was said. His colleague was efficient and finished the job that night. Listening closely, Paul discovered that the children were shouting the name Nordosko in Russian. He knew something was deeply wrong. After his colleague left, he snuck into the official archives. After searching all night, Paul finally found a top-secret file named after the town of Nordosko. It revealed that in 1973, the Russian town of Nordosko had experienced a similar event with demon children. 3 years later, the entire town of over 2,500 people had mysteriously vanished. The next day, the long-awaited picnic arrived. Westcott made a surprise appearance. He seemed to be able to communicate with the children somehow. The next moment, as if on command, the children began to act. Some silently watched their parents. Others secretly glanced at the spot where Zoe had hidden the backup document. Hannah pointedly asked her mother if she wasn't going to the picnic. It was as if they suddenly knew about Zoe and Sam's escape plan, likely leaked by Westcott, one of the few who knew. Sam took Hannah to the picnic but was clearly distracted, constantly thinking about how to get away. Perhaps out of guilt, he felt the children's eyes on him. Soon, he received the text from his wife. He told the other parents that Zoe wasn't feeling well and hurried home, unaware that the children in the woods were watching him intently. Not long after he left, it began to rain heavily, ending the picnic. Back at home, Zoe had finished packing. Sam rushed in, sharing his fear that the children already knew their plan. But Zoe didn't care. She didn't want her new baby to be born into this strange town. Sam fully supported her decision. But when Zoe went to retrieve the backup document from the wardrobe, the folder was gone. Downstairs, Sam saw a figure flash past the window. He cautiously checked the utility room but found nothing. As he turned around, he saw the mad neighbor's son, George. Sam felt his body freeze. Under the influence of the boy's power, he picked up a bottle of pesticide and held it to his own eyes. Inside, Zoe realized her husband was gone. As she looked for him, she saw her daughter Hannah had returned. The next moment, Zoe collapsed onto the sofa, her mind blank. Hannah asked if they were really leaving. Zoe confirmed that they were, and that they would leave with the baby in her belly. Hannah silently pulled something from her pocket, one of the poisonous berries from the mountain. At another house, Evie was surprised to see her grandmother Susanna arrive uninvited. Her attitude immediately soured. Susanna quickly explained that she had never wanted to harm anyone, but Evie retorted that she was just like Hannah's mother, full of hostility towards them. Susanna didn't deny it. Instead, she asked about the town Nordosko. Evie's face went pale. She said that their people had been killed in the cold. It turned out the children were from outer space. Their first arrival on Earth had been in Nordosko. The local residents had quickly noticed the children's strangeness and gathered them in a school. One day, the doors and windows of the classroom were locked and fighter jets appeared, leveling the town with missiles. The town's residents had been evacuated beforehand. The children had been burned alive, screaming for help. By now, Paul had finished reading the file and finally understood the children's origins. He ran into the agent, who had just arrived for work, and demanded to know if she had known all along. He also realized why the task force had covered up Lena's death. She had been silenced by them. The agent nodded. She was just following orders. Realizing the children were not to be trifled with, Paul guessed that Zoe's escape attempt would end in disaster. He raced to her house and saw through the window that Hannah was about to feed her mother the berry. Paul desperately tried to intervene, but his hands froze in midair, controlled by one of the children. The next moment, he collapsed, unconscious. Meanwhile, Susanna had heard the full story of what had happened in Nordosko. She hadn't realized the children's hatred for humans ran so deep, but as a psychotherapist, she was skilled at understanding human nature. She confidently declared that not all humans were xenophobic and that they could coexist in the town. Susanna promised that as long as the children didn't harm the residents, they could live there forever. Perhaps the children didn't want total destruction either, and they agreed to the deal. Because of this, Zoe, who was about to swallow the poison berry, was jolted back to her senses. In the yard, Sam and Paul regained consciousness. Hannah's attitude towards her parents also changed dramatically. And so the town enjoyed 2 years of strange peace. The children, now technically only 5 years old, looked like teenagers. They voraciously consumed all forms of human knowledge. For 2 years, both sides honored their agreement. Hannah seemed to adore her younger sister, who was now over a year old, and Zoe never mentioned leaving again. However, the mad neighbor's mad attitude towards his demon son George never changed. The other residents enjoyed a rare 2 years of happiness, but the peace was soon shattered. Westcott decided the children were gifted and selected 2 of them to undergo advanced testing at a lab outside of town. Susanna immediately voiced her concerns. The children had never left Midwich. But Westcott felt it was time for them to see the outside world. Ultimately, Susanna's granddaughter, Evie, and Paul's ward, Nathan, were chosen. What the adults didn't expect was that the lab was located on a military base. They were curious about Westcott's tests, but he cited confidentiality and told them to wait. The agent was also puzzled. The next moment, she and all the other staff members slumped over unconscious. Sam, who was teaching the other children, returned from the restroom to find his classroom empty. He followed a trail to the basement and was suddenly overcome with dizziness. Susanna and Paul, waiting outside the lab, also fainted. Only the mad neighbor's older son, David, noticed the school's security gate was disabled. He wandered into the basement and found a group of people standing in a bizarre circle, chanting as if performing a ritual. David stood frozen until someone turned around, at which point he fled. Sam then woke up, catching a glimpse of the boys retreating back. Back at the military base, Susanna and Paul were awakened by the sound of gunshots. They saw soldiers carrying something away but had no idea what had happened while they were unconscious. The mad neighbor discovered his older son David was missing and searched everywhere to no avail. The boy eventually returned home, but his mother quickly realized something was wrong. He was catatonic, his eyes glazed over with a white film. She clutched her son and screamed in a chicken voice. When David was taken to the hospital, she furiously blamed her husband for what had happened. The mad neighbor was soon taken in for questioning by the police. Susanna also went to the hospital to see what had happened to the boy. David, seemingly having lost his mind, kept repeating the word school. She was certain that only the children's powers could do this to someone so quickly. She was also curious about what the children had done at the military base. Paul advised her to be cautious, to first gain the children's trust and then investigate slowly. Sam couldn't forget the strange events at the school. He returned to the basement and found one of David's toys at the entrance. At the hospital, David's mother overheard a conversation between George and Westcott. They seemed to be trying to keep a secret, which was why they had erased David's memory. Horrified, David's mother grabbed her son and fled the room, calling Susanna for help on the way. She said she had discovered something terrible, but on her way to Susanna's house, George realized she had run off. As if on command, several children walked out onto the road, blocking her path. David's mother slammed on the brakes, but the children used their powers, and her car swerved uncontrollably, crashing head-on. The accident was the biggest event in the town in years. Westcott called an emergency meeting, claiming that David's mother had intended to harm the children and had died in an accident. This meant the peace treaty between the residents and the children was broken. The town was no longer safe. Westcott announced his decision to take the children and leave Midwich. The announcement was met with immediate opposition from most parents. Evie's mother confidently asked her daughter if she really wanted to leave. Evie didn't even look at her, her silence making her intentions clear. The mother felt like a fool and fled the room heartbroken. The mad neighbor had just been released from police custody when he heard of his wife's death. He was also officially informed that he could not see his son David until his emotional state was deemed stable. Just as Paul was leaving his house, Sam approached him with the toy. He couldn't hold it in any longer and told Paul what he had found. Paul realized it was a crucial clue. That night, he and Susanna snuck into the school basement. They found an electromagnetic field on the floor in the shape of a circle, likely caused by the children using their powers in unison. What happened to David was definitely their doing. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Paul told Susanna to hide and went upstairs, where he found two of the children waiting. They didn't want him there and used their powers to make him hand over the basement key. Fortunately, they didn't find Susanna. Evie coldly warned Paul not to meddle anymore and assigned Nathan to watch him 24/7. But Paul ignored them and drove toward the school. Having lived with him for so long, Nathan was more loyal to his family. He inflicted pain on himself to block the other children's connection and warned Paul that if he returned to the school now, the others would know he was helping him. Paul had to turn back, leaving Susanna waiting in the basement. She didn't see Paul, but an unexpected visitor arrived. It's Westcott. Fortunately, he didn't spot Susanna hiding behind some furniture. In the dim light, she saw that Westcott's pupils glowed faintly with a golden light, indicating that he was one of them. The next day, Susanna was finally rescued when staff arrived for work. She immediately found the agent and asked what had happened at the military base. The agent said she had also been unconscious and didn't know the details, but that Westcott seemed unaffected. This confirmed Susanna's suspicion. Westcott was likely an alien survivor from the previous generation of children. And now, he and the new alien children had killed the base commander and taken control of all the soldiers. They were clearly planning something big. The confined and mad neighbor had no intention of staying quiet. He spent all his savings to buy a handgun, clearly preparing to make a move. Just then, George approached. He seemed to have overheard their conversation and told Susanna to come with him. Paul tried to stop him but was instantly knocked unconscious by the boy's powers. For the other's safety, Susanna agreed to go. George kept asking how much she knew about their secret. Susanna nervously insisted they were friends, not enemies, and tried to walk away. But she quickly found she couldn't move. The metal roof above her began to buckle. It seemed she was about to die in another accident. At that critical moment, several gunshots rang out and George fell to the ground. It was the mad neighbor. He was on the brink of a breakdown, blaming the children for his wife's death and his son's condition. Roaring in anger, he went to the hospital room where George was being treated. As he was about to leave with him, he found all the exits blocked by the other children. They used their powers in unison, forcing the mad neighbor's gun to turn slowly toward his own son, David. At the last second, Paul shot and killed the mad neighbor, saving the stunned David. The children gathered around their fallen comrade, forming a circle as their eyes glowed gold, seemingly severing their connection with the dead. Back home, Susanna received terrible news. Her daughter was planning to leave town with her granddaughter. In contrast, Paul returned home to find a note from Nathan, telling someone to save him. The boy clearly didn't want to leave. The town's residents were still in shock over the hospital shooting and demanded an explanation from the task force. But a group of soldiers stormed into the meeting, announcing they were taking over security. A town-wide curfew was imposed, with no one allowed out after dark. Paul saw the soldiers blockading the roads, so he got out of his car and met with Susanna secretly. He noticed the soldiers were emotionless, merely following orders. Susanna's theory was correct. They were being controlled. If the children left Midwich, they would control more soldiers, and eventually the entire world. They were scheduled to leave by military vehicle the next morning. Susanna decided to infiltrate the group, as her daughter had been taken. She had to save her. She asked Paul to do everything in his power to stop the children from leaving. After a long silence, he pulled out Nathan's note. If the opportunity arose, he wanted Susanna to save Nathan too. With their plans set, they went their separate ways. Susanna went directly to where the children were staying, claiming she couldn't bear to be parted from her daughter and wanted to leave with them. To gain their trust, she told them everything she had discovered, including the secret that Westcott was one of them. Just then, a mother came running and screaming. She couldn't bear to let her child go and wanted to say goodbye, but when she saw her child, she tried to take him away by force. The child's eyes glowed gold, and he made a soldier pull the trigger. Seeing the woman shot dead like a piece of shit, Evie's mother was speechless. She now saw that years of mother-daughter love meant nothing to these children. To secure her place, Susanna had to go against her conscience, telling the children they had done the right thing and that the era of humanity was over. She offered to be their guide. The children were happy to accept a human traitor and finally agreed to let Susanna leave with them. But first, she had to spend the night in a basement. Curious, Susanna quietly asked Nathan why. He told her she would find out soon enough. Meanwhile, Paul was in a warehouse building a bomb. His phone rang. It was Nathan, warning him to hide in a basement immediately. After hanging up, Paul glanced at the cut on his hand and then followed the other children to the school playground. They formed a perfect circle, and as they activated their powers, the town's electricity went haywire. Sam happened to receive Paul's warning just in time and got his family into the basement. But the residents who didn't get the message were not so lucky. They all collapsed without warning, a repeat of the bizarre event from 5 years ago. Soldiers who had been waiting rushed into the houses, erasing any trace of the children's existence, their belongings, their presence. Susanna quickly understood. The blackout would make the residents forget about the children. If all physical evidence was gone, no one would ever remember they existed, making it easier for them to control the world. After witnessing the mother being shot earlier that day, Evie's mother had finally seen the children's true nature. With Susanna's constant guidance, she finally let go of her attachment to Evie. The most important thing now was to escape from under the children's noses. The next morning, the children were brought back to town, ostensibly to say goodbye to their parents, but actually to test if their memories had been erased. None of them remembered. Sam and his wife, having hidden in the basement, were unaffected. When Hannah came to their door, they had to pretend they didn't know her. However, their younger daughter's greeting to her gave them away. Hannah certainly heard it, but in the end, she didn't expose her former parents, simply telling them to keep it a secret. Meanwhile, Paul snuck into a vehicle, knocked out a soldier, and put on his uniform. He successfully blended in with the convoy and planted the bomb on the bus. Susanna told her daughter to take Nathan and run for their shitty lives. It was their last chance. She herself would stay behind to keep the children occupied. Just as the two ran off, the other children sensed Nathan's departure and sent soldiers after them. Just as they were about to be caught, Nathan stepped on a bear trap. The intense pain severed his mental link with the others. Susanna seized the opportunity, suggesting that since Nathan didn't want to leave, they should just cut him off. The children hesitated, then agreed. They couldn't let one boy delay their grand plan. They formed a circle again and used their powers to sever their connection with Nathan. From that moment on, Nathan was truly free. The children boarded the bus, ready to head to the state military base. To keep them calm, Susanna stayed with them. Paul followed in another vehicle. All he had to do was detonate the bomb and the children would be annihilated. But he didn't want Susanna to die with them. As he weighed his options, their leader, Westcott, received a message that the soldier Paul had knocked out had been found. He ordered the convoy to stop to find the infiltrator. Paul knew time was running out. He no longer had the luxury of creating an escape opportunity for Susanna. Gritting his teeth, he detonated the bomb. The entire bus, carrying all the children and Susanna, was consumed by a fireball and turned to dust. An interstellar conspiracy that spanned decades was finally crushed, and that is the end of the entire drama. The show's title is very fitting. Cuckoos are the original brood parasites. They never build their own nests, instead laying their eggs in the nests of other birds. The cuckoo chick often hatches first and will push the host's eggs or chicks out of the nest, monopolizing the parent's care, a behavior identical to that of the children in the show. The only question that remains is whether the sole alien survivor, Nathan, will change his ways over the years or become another Westcott. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.